Okay, you're probably looking at the title of this video and going, wait, what? Don't all games have gameplay? Well, here's the thing. I see a real division in the types of games that come out nowadays. Sure, you get the whole package in certain games, but some emphasize gameplay over story, and some emphasize story over gameplay, and neither one is wrong in its implementation. Certain gamers want certain games in those specific categories. So, for my end of the year lists, I decided to split the list. One that focuses on the gameplay element in one list, and the story element in the other. This list, of course, well, based on the title, are games that bring you the best gameplay. Now, best, of course, is subjective, and I'm going to get this out of the way. This isn't objective like my reviews try to be. These are the games that I think show the best gameplay design this year for me. Now, the criteria is simple. I had to play the game. That's really it. So while games like Red Dead Redemption 2 aren't on the list because, well, I didn't play them and I didn't want to, I did buy and play a bunch of contenders this year to try to find the best of the best. So enough talk. These are the top 15 gameplay games of 2018. Number 15, Dragon Quest XI. Look, I know that Japanese RPGs aren't necessarily the most sexy of gameplay system nowadays, despite Persona 5 getting some Game of the Year nominations last year. But frankly, it's one of my favorite genres as a whole, and despite it usually being for the epic story adventure, adventure does go hand in hand with gameplay. Now, I'll be honest here. It has been a long time since I've played a Dragon Quest game, and maybe I don't remember some of the revisions of the old games that may have just been another system in the series. But Dragon Quest XI's twist on the formula make me feel a combination of nostalgia for the past while still feeling like the genre is moving forward. Enemies pack a hit in Dragon Quest, as 3 to 4 attacks may take down one of your characters. And while the difficulty may be on the easy side at times, there's enough here to force you to think about your attacks. The semi-grouping system works well so that certain powers aren't necessarily abused. And I like the multiple weapon options that can be switched mid-battle, even if early on there's no real reason to use it. One of my favorite parts, however, is that mages and healers can actually recover reasonable MP with using their attacks with their wands or staffs. It's one of my major complaints about JRPGs in general, and not feeling like I can actually use magic on a regular basis. Here, that's taken care of while still being balanced, and that's great. There's good evolution of a limit type system with the pep system, allowing for increased stats, but using it before it's up can get a reasonable attack off that could cause a huge status or get an item for you. Each of your party members have reasonable uniqueness to them, and bosses push you to the limit without feeling frustrating. Side quests seem to be where the game is lacking in my mind, but the ones that are here do at least try to mix things up. I do love the portable forge and the equipment system in general, however. It takes a bit to actually get the equipment you need. You can't just buy everything once you get to a new town. And you really do feel the power boost from each of them, especially when you gather all your supplies and use your forge to make a really good shield or something of the like. There's good reasons to explore as well to find some of those recipes. And honestly, the formula here has a really good pacing to it, especially with the story. The fact is that I don't find myself grinding as much in Dragon Quest XI, I don't find myself getting lost, I just find myself going through the game at a reasonable pace. It's really streamlined, and that's what I do appreciate about the game, and that's why it's probably worth your time to take a look at if you love Japanese RPGs. But if you do, you've probably already played it. I'm just a little late to the bandwagon. Number 14. Celeste. Celeste's place on this list comes down to a couple of big things, but it all starts with its controls. I mean, that shouldn't be surprising, considering that it's a precision platformer and all, but being able to hit that wall barely within an inch of the edge, then jumping off of it to avoid falling to your death is something that Celeste does rather nicely. It also helps that when you fall, you're immediately right back into the thick of things. Now, while there is a frustration factor in these types of games, I found myself easily ignoring them in this case, thanks to the challenges always feeling obtainable. I didn't get the same case of things like Super Meat Boy. This one felt a little bit more obtainable in certain ways, and it kept me wanting to play forward as opposing to just throwing the controller across the room. However, great controls don't mean anything if the level design was lacking, and thankfully Celeste comes up big in this department too. Precision platform level design is a bit different, as you want a little more repetition than other games in the genre, allowing for players to get used to new concepts you throw at them, but you will need to be careful not to overdo it, as players will start to get bored of rooms that seem the same rather quickly if you go too far. You do have to mix things up rather nicely, and Celeste does a great job of that, making it so that you get an understanding of the concepts and what you need to master, and then moving on, letting you try something different, and then coming back and reusing that at a later level. My favorite part was when you got chased by your mirror half, as you feel the tension at these points, changing the pace of the game completely. But it doesn't change what you need to do. In fact, there wasn't a low point to what I played in Celeste, which is saying something, as the consistency of the experience was great from start to finish. If I was able to finish it this year. I wasn't able to. But what I played was worth your time and money. And frankly, I will finish the game sometime this year. With all my free time. Number 13. Book of Demons. We all have inner demons. For some, it's alcohol. Others, it's pornography. For me, it's addictive card and strategy games that make me want to play them, despite the fact that I'm trying to do other reviews and videos at the time. After playing Book of Demons for a stream one day, I've been finding myself wanting to take time over and over again just to play another run of this game, and you know you've got a great game when I was playing other games on this list at the time, even ones higher than this one. The mixture of the table-type statue aesthetic with a pseudo-action strategy, almost clicker-type implementation is rather unique, while still actually quite familiar at the same time. Now, this game may look simple on the surface, and in the first hour or two, you may question the game's difficulty and if you're gonna have a good time. Don't. Because when you get into the mid to late dungeons with a bunch of different enemy types and them spawning all around you, you'll realize that you have to be on the ball and figure out which enemy to take out first as they come toward you, and how to get out of the panic situations you've been thrown into. A good mixture of skills and abilities allow you some creativity to try to deal with the enemies in question, and develop a specific strategy within each of the three classes. The loot system allowing for upgrades of these card drops rather than straight up level and rarity drops works as well, as it gives you reasons to experiment with more of these combinations before you commit to upgrading them. There's really smart decisions regarding the resurrection system as well, that force you to consider holding off on a purchase just in case you run into a problem in the next dungeon, and the game does risk and reward rather well, giving you more rewards for going more dungeon levels at a time. There is a lot of finesse to the design here that I really appreciate, and it's the kind of game that you can spend hundreds of hours on if you're not careful. Look, if you're expecting a loot type experience like Diablo or a strategy game like StarCraft, you're not looking in the right place here. But this is the perfect type of game to watch a movie or YouTube videos with, without being fearful that you may look away at the wrong time. You do have some leeway, but take a chance on it. You'll be glad you did, except for all that time you wasted. So much time. Number 12. Frostpunk. While the difficulty of a game like this War of Mind and Frostpunk are designed specifically to help with the feeling of helplessness of the story, Frostpunk is more than a game trying to pull on your heartstrings. It's a mind-stressing experience where you'll have to make hard decisions while managing your resources wisely. It's also a builder with a really unique heat mechanic, and you have to really consider how you build your town from more than a style standpoint to get the best out of the heat that you have here. There's a lot to juggle, having to manage your food resources and decide if those survivors that you just found is worth putting a stress on it, or if you should turn them away in order to keep what you have. Between the limited resources, you'll need to decide if you should build another medical tent to deal with the vast amount of sick people you have on hand right now, or if you take a chance and build the next upgrade for gathering coal, so you can overheat your reactor on a more regular basis to deal with the freezing cold. There's so many decisions to make here, and there's not a right one among most of them all the time. Even beyond the ethical issues, there's always going to be something that you're going to have to deal with, and it puts pressure and pressure and pressure on you, and if you don't like that sort of pressure, this game is not going to be for you. But it's optimization that is the key here. Starting the game over again and getting an idea of, okay, I'll allocate 15 people to go gather coal, 5 to gather wood, 3 to gather metal, and make all the rest of them hunters. You try to find the best way to keep people alive. And yes, there's some randomization here, and it keeps it interesting with some of the events and things that you run across, but it's not too random where you feel like you're always waiting for the next disaster to hit. There is a good variety of difficulties in terms of the enhancers to give you more resources at the start of the game, or make events or social events a little bit more frequent or less frequent. And the thing is that while the base game of difficulty is up there is something that people who love strategy games and builder games will find enjoyable here, even if it makes you want to pull your hair out because all of a sudden you didn't take into account something and your entire city just comes falling apart. A good set of controls here with the ability to pause and the ability to rotate and the ability to knock down to one person to see what their status is. Overall, it's a solid strategy game, and even though it is the only builder on this list, yeah, it is worth your time here. And the fact is, even though I don't play them that often, Frostpunk had me going back to it even after I made my initial findings. Because hey, I want to see people succeed. And like this war of mine, I would keep on trying until that happened. Number 11. Just Shapes and Beats. This is why you listen to your viewership. For some reason, Just Shapes and Beats initially missed my radar, despite the fact that it falls into several categories that reach my, oh man, I've got to play it scale. It's a rhythm game first of all, which I've always been a fan of, from the old days of Elite Beat Agents to more modern Hatsume Miku games. But it also remixes it with bullet hell type dodging mechanics with them, leading to an interesting challenge that works surprisingly well. The game hits well on its difficulty level, allowing players to get through the hard challenges by learning the enemy movement patterns, but leaving enough wiggle room for those who haven't seen those challenges before to still get by. It does help that, like any great rhythm game, Just Shapes and Beats has a good varied soundtrack that alternates beats per minute and styles rather nicely, forcing you to adjust on every track to its new tune. Granted, it's also helped by its extremely sharp visuals that you don't want to draw your eyes away from, but that's only scratching the game's surface. What sets Just Shape and Beats apart in the genre is the fact that every level offers a new and unique challenge. Most rhythm games use a base system with simple controls, and thus the only uniqueness is the music at times. Here, however, the game throws different firing patterns in every level, and more importantly, plays off those firing patterns in the types of dodging patterns that you have to use. Sometimes rushing about continuously moving can be the key, but sometimes that can get you in real trouble as you run right into something coming off screen. Then sometimes you'll want to stay in a small area and stay relatively still, but then realize that you haven't seen the threat coming from the top. Situational awareness is tested in many ways here, and it all leads to a blood-pumping game that keeps you wanting to play it. Boss fights are a highlight and really test your patience and your skills. And frankly, even the small criticisms of the game, I can actually argue for them being necessary for the game in the long run. Just Shapes and Beats is not only worth your time, it's probably going to be a game that you repeatedly come back to over time. Number 10. CrossCode. Can I just say, there were too many games that came out in 2018 that deserve to be looked at for this list. And yes, that's always a complaint I have at the end of the year. But I've got into around 32 games that was considered for this list and this list alone by the time I was done. CrossCode was one of the final ones that I tried, and I realized that I made a deadly mistake for leaving it as one of the last ones, because I instantly fell in love with the mixture of secret Amana mechanics with an interesting MMO type story. Of all the games on these lists, this one is probably one that could have gone higher or lower based on more play hours, but frankly, I just ran out of time for making these lists. I didn't expect the abundance of side quests and puzzle platforming in regular gameplay here, but ended up wanting to play a lot more of it once I bit into it in my first stream. However, part of the fun here is just trying to figure out how to get to the next area in question, as there's an emphasis on exploration that many games of the ARPG genre don't have when it comes to using detective and navigation-like skills. Hell, what's funny about CrossCode is that it does several things that I would normally dock the genre for on a normal basis, but I found myself enjoying it in this specific case and implementation. Like, take for example, I've had a lot of problems trying to find quest locations at times, or even finding the person that I needed to return a quest to. But for some reason, it worked in CrossCode, even if I wasted 5, 10, 15 minutes at a time, probably because there were clues that I could find in my quest log, and there was something about actually finding the place that was fun. Nevertheless, I wanted to do pretty much every side quest I found, and I loved the ability to switch ones on the fly when I was walking around. But the core combat mechanics are the star here, and the mixture of ranged versus melee attacks are the biggest highlight. Knowing when your Spiromancer should start throwing orbs of death to wear down your opponent, or when to get in close for slicing your enemy repeatedly, is huge in this combat, and I loved it. Combat has a good pace with great enemy variety and reasonable AI. Like, weasels won't come up to get hit unless you give them space and stop attacking. This also has one of the smartest systems in the chain system that rewards players for taking out more and more enemies in a row, and has really good risk and reward. The shield and dodge systems and the controls do take a while to get used to, but with the way the game is constructed, it's one of the only effective systems that I could envision while still giving a reasonable threat at any point in the fight. It is a time muncher for sure, as wanting to do everything will take hundreds of hours. But I could still see myself enjoying myself at that point, with the variety that the game gives me. Number 9. Bloodstained: Curse of the Moon. While some of the most famous games in the franchise helped to create the genre known as Metroidvania, some people forget that the original Castlevania games were a lot different. Straight side-scrolling games with very purposeful attack distance and patterns, and gameplay that really punished missteps and recklessness. The new franchise of Bloodstained will be paralleling Symphony of the Night with its release of Ritual of the Night in the future. but Init Creates decided to also parallel the original Castlevania for the NES with Bloodstained Curse of the Moon, which, if the quality of updating the classic Castlevania gameplay works as well as it did in Curse of the Moon, we'll have a hit on our hands in Ritual of the Night when it comes out with no question. The slow, methodical combat works well, as you feel every hit you take thanks to limited health items. But each hit is easily avoidable, as each enemy movement and attack pattern gives plenty of time to react and deal with the problem at hand. What I love about this combat is that it puts your mind before physical reaction times and super kinetic gameplay. You can take that moment to breathe, to think about how you take on the next challenge, and execute a game plan. And while it helps to know what an enemy is going to do, it isn't undoable even if it's your first time you've seen them before. Despite the focus on the classic style, however, the ability to switch characters to deal with different obstacles helps make Bloodstained Curse of the Moon its own game. It does a great job of mixing up the necessity levels of the mechanics of each of the characters well. In some cases, there's only one hero that's the obvious fit to take an area on, while others, certain ones have advantages, of course, but you are always balancing your health resources with each of the heroes. The bosses are a good challenge of skill, without going overboard with NES Horde as well. It's a great step back in time while still staying in the present, and a lot of games could learn from the game design that is implemented here. It's actually got me really excited for Ritual of the Night, and it shows how smaller games with a franchise can be great advertisements for games to come. Number 8. Spiderman. While I've not been a huge fan of the open world mission structure that every game seems to want to emulate 6 years ago, there have been certain games that I remember fondly. Many of them have superhero-like figures, like the infamous series and Cole, and some of the Batman Arkham games. But it goes back even further than that, to the Onslaught in the early 2010s, and the one that I remember renting over and over again even before that was the PS2's Spider-Man. Luckily, Marvel's Spider-Man in 2018 took me back to my youth in the best of ways. Of course, it all starts with the movement system, and once you've got a handle of the different abilities at your exposure, you'll find yourself refusing to use any sort of fast travel system because it's so fun to move from area to area. It's easy to say it makes you feel like Spider-Man, but it's more of how the movement works well with the city's construction, giving you multiple options at any point without sacrificing speed or forcing a specific movement style. It allows for navigation to help you get to the reasonable side quests, even when you have to slow down and find that one backpack stuck to the roof of an archway. One of my biggest complaints about these type of games is the side quests can feel a bit formulaic. And while Spider-Man doesn't exactly do something reasonably different here, thanks to that core movement and stalking system, the game still shines even in this repetition. But the biggest upgrade is to the counter-based combat that we've seen in these games before, as the spider sense is implemented so well. Not too expansive so that it counters everything under the sun like some of the original Assassin's Creed games, but enough leeway to not make it feel like a way too specialized mechanic. The different gadgets all served a reasonable purpose in combat, and the ability to dodge, throw, and isolate enemies with your webs meant that combat encounters felt more dynamic and less like just another fight. Stalking sections also worked rather well here too, picking off enemies one by one while staying outside the range of others and hiding bodies in their midst. Look, I don't cover a lot of AAA games on this channel, but you may be surprised that I still do play them from time to time. Now, it's usually because they are overhyped and already have the coverage, and don't deliver on what they promised. But in Spider-Man's case, it certainly did. Number 7. Return of the Obra Dinn. Yeah, I know. This is probably a surprise on the list for you. I mean, the story-focused Obra Dinn is a game without a lot of direct gameplay mechanics. You pull out a watch over a corpse to see how they died, and have to use your brain to figure it out via the visuals. Seriously, when it comes to mechanical gameplay, it's, well, actually one can argue that it's not really gameplay. But here's the thing you need to realize. Gameplay can be a combination of things. And while the mechanical portion of Obra Dinn may be lacking, what it doesn't lack is immersing you in the world and getting you to solve its riddles, the whole point of the actual gameplay. In fact, it's one of the best in the genre at it. And it's actually a game that I really should do a game design video on, because never before have I seen a game use its informational clues as well as Obra Dinn did. The fact is, the developer, Lucas Pope, known for his cult hit of Papers, Please, knocked it out of the park from a detective-like gameplay perspective. He understood that the changing of informational clues on various levels, whether it be the clothing the characters wear to the proximity of characters in a photo, help give you information in a variety of ways, all in which you can interpret to try to figure out the mystery. It's his choice of giving you confirmation after sets of 3 characters, giving you some wiggle room to try to figure things out, but not having you shotgun answers to try to get things, that is masterful here. It's the fact that his choice to stay with the simple graphics, focusing on specific elements and minimizing certain choices, actually make the gameplay much, much better. Yes, Return of the Obra Dinn doesn't have the action of Smash, the strategy of Frostpunk, or the addictiveness of Hold Down. What it does have is a smart set of mechanics that put your brain through the ultimate test, and that's why it lands here on the list. Number 6. Dusk. Dusk is one of those games that many look at the surface of the game and immediately go, oh, it's a Doom Quake homage. While yes, there's definitely some influence from those generations of the FPS, Dusk is so much more than a tribute game. It's a smartly designed FPS that over its 3 episodes hit a reasonable variety. It hits horror elements and painkiller-like elements early on, to more chaotic arenas towards the end of episode 1, to long spiraling sections of enemies and traps in some of episode 2. What's fantastic about Dusk is that while the movement system feels like it was directly taken out of Quake, it's the fact that combat has a lot of variety to it, with a great mix-up of enemy types as well as some reasonable yet exploitable AI. Wait, Dragnix, why would you want AI to be exploitable? Well, what I mean is that you can exploit distances or doors in the game, and you are supposed to get through the challenges and deal with maybe a little bit of low health. But the AI isn't dumb as well. It will fire at you when you look, and it will force you to change things up, especially bosses, which I was surprised when the episode 1 boss fired in front of me, knowing that I would circle around over and over again on him. That's rather impressive. The highlight in my mind is fantastic level design. In fact, I would kill to hear Dave Oshry, one of the developers behind the game, give a game design talk about this level design, because it's fantastic. Exploration is rewarded with secrets in smart places, but the game also doesn't get into a groove and stay there. It could punish you for being overzealous, and uses scenarios of enemy placement rather wisely, especially in horror-type sections. The game caught me off guard on a regular basis thanks to this level design, but it never felt cheap. When I did catch the clues of a groaning enemy behind a wall, I felt like a badass and smarter than what the game threw at me. When I used the height and verticality of a certain section so that I wouldn't take damage, I felt smart, I felt awesome, which is what you want to feel in an FPS. Weapons have good feel and have their specializations, but also can be used outside of their best scenarios when you get into a panic. In fact, there's not much I can really say that Dusk doesn't do well in the gameplay department. And to be honest with you, I feel bad putting it this low on the list, because I can't really point to a lot of things and say, well, that's where it could have made up ground. It's just a fantastic FPS that is overlooked, but did sell well enough to get off the overlooked list. But trust me, if you're any sort of FPS player, Dusk is for you. Number 5. God of War. It's a little bit strange to think that at one time, there were some people who were very skeptical of what is the game of the year in many people's eyes. But give Sony credit. They knocked it out of the park with some of their exclusives this year, and nothing showed it more than God of War. While I do think the story is actually better than the gameplay here, and if you would have told me that 10 years ago, I would have laughed you out of the room, that's not saying the gameplay is bad at all. Far from it, in fact. The change from the arenas of the old series with DMC-like gameplay to this more sophisticated third-person action game works rather well, and the core reason is the emphasis on dodge and block mechanics. It rewards patience for players who don't have high skill levels yet, but can react to enemy attacks. And yet, players who have mastered moving from enemy to enemy with ease without necessarily forcing a defensive style can still do so here, and that's one of the game's strengths. There are a good amount of ways to fight your enemies. The biggest change from the older game is the throwable axe, which does a shit ton when it comes to isolating certain enemies and forcing a stun or brief period of relaxation while the axe hits the enemy. There's no better feeling than using the axe to hit them from afar, rushing toward the enemy and recalling it, and smacking them in the face with a heavy attack. There's something about the pacing of this combat, how you go from enemy to enemy, and how you have to deal with them, knock them down, chop them down, and trying to keep your health up. It's hit its sublime gameplay loop here. It's also fantastic AI that uses flanking and pincer moves on you, forcing you to turn around constantly and deal with the enemies. And Atreus isn't just some companion to soak damage here. The use of his arrows and the ability to hold an enemy in place is vital in certain fights, and it helped him feel more like a partner than someone you just dragged along. The gear system, while a little bit new for a God of War game, yeah, I understand that the God of War games had gear before, but not in this sort of loot type system. It allowed for good customization of Kratos and Atreus, and the game also hits the difficulty curve rather nicely. I really did feel the challenge when playing at the hardest difficulty, and even when I bumped it back to normal, I did feel the challenge a little bit later on. There's good pacing of encounters, along with puzzles that weren't too hard, but weren't necessarily just time draggers, and really, everything just works together rather nicely in a one specific package. Like I always say, if one system's good, but the other one sort of drags it down, it's gonna be an okay game. But God of War, everything enhances the next system, and that's when you get that gameplay loop that you just don't want to get out of. Number 4. Into the Breach. Into the Breach is simple and complex at the same time. Yes, you only control 3 mechs, and you don't have a lot of actions per turn. But each of your actions have a huge amount of consequences in this fantastically designed strategy game. First of all, I love the fact that these base units aren't just flavors of high damage, low defense, or high speed, low attack power. There's a ton of different unit types, one that shield buildings and your fellow units as their only action, to units that are designed to hop over others and can only fire in certain directions and ways. Now the key to this system here is the shove back system, where certain attacks and mechs will push units from their spaces, and if they run into hazards, they'll take damage, or destroy what they run into. The thing is, that's on both sides of the fence here, so you always have to consider every move rather carefully, as you try to avoid destroying your active power grid that acts as a health bar between missions, or using it to knock units into others and maybe preventing another unit from coming out of the ground. Mission selection has good risk and reward while having a semi-varied mission objective, while some missions have vastly different environments to deal with, like water or holes to throw enemies into. There's good unit variety on the enemy side that you can't just defend against one unit type and hope for the best. There's good difficulty of sub-objectives, but they aren't just gimmies, and sometimes you'll have to abandon them to be able to beat the mission as a whole. Now, again, I mentioned this in a previous list entry, but Into the Breach's cycle of gameplay, how the units and the mechs work well with the environment, how the environments work well with the UI, so on and so forth. Everything is tightly constructed to the point where everything enhances the next. It's so easy to just bring up a game, play it for a good 15, 20, 25 minutes while watching YouTube videos. And to be quite honest, I actually fear the day that this is possibly ever released to Android, because I think it could work on a mobile platform, and if it is put on an Android, there goes all my free time. Nevertheless, Into the Breach hits the number 3 spot just because, well, sometimes a simple strategy game with a lot of depth to it is what the world needs, and Into the Breach is the prime example of how a small indie game can show you a lot with maybe not exactly the most. Number 3, ZeroRanger. The runner-up for most overlooked game of 2018 from my list of the same name comes in with yet another fantastic performance here. ZeroRanger is not only one of the best shmups I've played in my lifetime, it is absurd to me that it's still not getting the recognition that it deserves, even when it got onto Donkey's Game of the Year list. I could sit here and bitch about how the shmup genre always gets overlooked, and I could complain about how many games can learn from its simplicity of shooting enemy fighters while dodging enemy bullets. But you know what? It's everyone else's loss for not picking up the game. Precision is the name of the game here, as the ability to fly through not quite a bullet hell, but not quite a standard shmup, is actually down to the pixel in terms of accuracy. Never once did I sit there yelling at the game for being unfair or being crap, despite it putting me in situation at times where I might not have had the right weapon or prior knowledge of what was upcoming. The magic of keeping your multiplier up through fantastic enemy placement will draw Score Chaser for miles here, while a more unique continue system and a reasonable progression curve will allow newbies in the genre to get accustomed to the game at their own pace. Specialized side weapons are well designed, not overshadowing your main means of attack, but allowing for more flexibility in certain situations. It also helps that you may be able to turn into a robot with a giant drill at a certain point in the game, because let's be honest, who doesn't want that in their game? Bosses are a great challenge without being overwhelming. The music highlights the action and has the addictive qualities the gameplay has. I could go on and on about praising this game. However, it should be obvious that if I'm putting ZeroRanger above games like Spiderman, like Frostpunk, like Smash, there's a core gameplay loop that will knock you off your feet here. For the love of God, go buy ZeroRanger. Right now. Stop the video if you have to. Heck, if you don't have to watch the rest of this video just so the fact that you can go buy ZeroRanger, do it now. You'll be glad you did. Number 2, Monster Hunter World. It's another number 2 slot, and of course it's another multiplayer game. This is a trend on the channel for the last 2 years in this number 2 slot. For me, it's always hard to separate the fun that I have with my girlfriend, Andrea, and how great the gameplay of the games we play together are. Nevertheless, Monster Hunter World was my first introduction into the series, and well, we're still playing it even after 60 hours. That should tell you how good the game is, and the fact is that this video is probably going to be delayed a little bit longer because, well, of all the hours that we played. First of all, the weapons having such distinctive playstyles here is fascinating for this type of game, and it works well with all your friends to go after these giant monsters. While Andrea played a kinetic slash style that gets in close with dual blades, I was more of the heavy hitter with my giant feather duster of doom. Really, I just crafted this because it's a feather duster of doom. Whether it's not a regular hammer, a crossbow, a sword and shield, each of these have their own reasonably different playstyle, and it makes the game feel like a whole new experience every time you change it up. Yeah, I can go in defensive with the lance, or I can go a little bit more aggressive with the hammer while focusing on the head. These bosses, these monsters, feel like actual huge monsters to take down, with higher level monsters taking planning and specific resistance building and items to deal with them on a more sane playing field. The ability to break pieces off means that targeting limbs is essential at times and can actually change the fight very, very drastically. It's frankly some of the best chaotic combat I've seen in the last few years, and I love the fact that there's also a chase to grab them, as they just won't let you kill them, and the capture mechanic rewards players who can get them within an inch of their life and drop a trap on them. Now, the game also does something that no other game has really done, at least for me. Finding and gathering items and gathering things for your preparation is actually fun. I can't believe I'm about to say that, but the grinding in this game is really, really fun. It's just trying to find that next item to be able to upgrade your weapon and find a new, armor set and try to match your armor set is really cool. And I know I'm being a little bit generic in some of this cool, interesting, great thing, but when I look at the actual details of the battle system, I really want to dive into it in a game design video more than anything else, because I think Capcom has done something really brilliantly here with the way this is designed. Overall, Monster Hunter World is fantastic in the way that it's implemented, and frankly is the multiplayer game of 2018. In fact, it probably will be something I keep on playing well into 2019, at least with the time that I have here. Number 1. Dead Cells. Those who know my history with the channel probably saw this coming. I mean, I know. I didn't play the game on this channel, and I didn't cover it, because while it's my indie type of jam, I'm here to show you guys games that you don't know about on the channel. And everyone and their mother covered this game. But there's a reason for that. Dead Cells is a version of the roguelite action game with almost perfected gameplay cycles. More than Rogue Legacy, more than Crypt of the Necrodancer, and more addictive than Dr. Pepper for me. And considering there's 4 cans of it on my desk right now, that should tell you all you need to know. And why Dead Cells is number 1 on the gameplay side of things this year. It all starts with the 3-stat system with diminishing returns on certain parts of specialization, but still gives you reason to specialize depending on your weapon choices. The 2-part main system and sub-weapon system gives you a lot of customization, and the fact that each weapon prefers a specific stat type means that maybe that more powerful weapon isn't the right one for you right now because of your stats. There's a fantastic variety of weaponry that plays vastly different with each combination, whether it be a slow and steady combination with a sword and shield, or an aggressive health-stealing sphere with some long-ranged options from a bow. One of the biggest things that Dead Cells gets right, however, is the enemy and level variety on the gameplay loop, where new parts of the loop may give you trouble at first, but learning enemy patterns and familiar locations allows you to exploit the weaknesses more and more with each run, as you gain little by little by little into the game. It gets one thing else right, reasons to fight at the end of the run, and the balance between speed and slow and steady for upgrades, thanks to the times that doors have huge rewards if you can get to them in time, yeah, that all works fantastically. It forces you to consider if you really want to explore for that next upgrade if you think you can get to it. And it's amazing to me how each of these runs played out so differently thanks to all of the above. I always wanted to almost immediately get back into the next run, as enemy variety is strong and I didn't feel the effects of the loop, and it kept me on my toes, providing a great resistance at early parts of the run still, and yet I felt like I could handle them with ease. I was surprised how well the level design worked in its procedural generation. It constantly makes challenges where I could exploit my sub-weapons in certain ways, or force me to take chances when I get cursed and realize that I may be ending my run with the way I have to move forward. It's the type of water cooler game where you talk to someone who's played the game and you tell them about your build and tell them about how you got through this part and how this boss really gave you a problem but you were able to get through it thanks to this combination of things. It's one of those games that is very, very hard to put down, and the fact that it's now on the Switch makes it even worse because it's on the go. It's actually a reviewer's worst nightmare, or at least my kind of worst nightmare. A game that you know everybody has played, you know that everybody's enjoyed, and the fact is, you are enjoying it so much that you're sort of forgetting that you've got other reviews to do at the time, and it's hard to put down. Hard to put down. That's pretty much Dead Cells in a nutshell. Anyway, that's it for the gameplay list. Following this will be the story list, probably next Monday. The reason I say Monday is that even though I want it to be done this week, this Friday, the fact is that I always seem to go a little bit long on these videos in terms of the editing. And I do want to try to get another video done this week for a smaller indie game that is coming out this week, so it's going to take up a little bit of my time. That will also have my Game of the Year is the overall choice as well. In addition, for the giveaways, I have to reevaluate exactly what I'm doing. I hope that people would join the Discord and everything would be, smooth, but then some people don't respond, and unfortunately, it's just a little bit of a mess. Maybe I will make a little bit of a web page or a program for people to automatically join, and that, it'll just email it to them given some information. But then that's, privacy and issues like that. I don't know how I'm going to handle it, guys. Anyway, all I ask from you, I'm not going to ask you for likes. I'm not going to ask you to subscribe. I just want some comments to say, hey, how can I make these videos better? How can I, make things more interesting for you on the channel? Anyway, this is Dragnix signing out, and as always, keep on gaming.